So, what we're doing here in this webinar is to talk about my 5-MeO-DMT Integration Specialist training course with Mindscape Institute. And more broadly speaking, we're also just going to be covering what people who have experience with 5-MeO-DMT, what they are looking for afterwards. What do they need and how best can we help them? And we were just having a little pre-chat there, and I like to say that there's a lot more people out there serving 5-MeO and a lot more people out there experiencing 5-MeO than there are people who are really trained on what integration entails with 5-MeO-DMT. And as I'll be discussing here in this presentation, that 5-MeO-DMT has a lot of very unique properties to it that are very different from other psychedelics. So even though there are a lot of training programs and even books that are available on integration with psychedelics and psychedelic therapy, in my opinion, because they are not really informed about 5-MeO-DMT and its unique nature and property, that they're not really providing what people need when it comes to 5-MeO-DMT. So we're going to be talking about what people are looking for, how we do the training, what it covers, and also we're going to be talking a little bit about what it doesn't cover. And like to emphasize that when it comes to 5-MeO-DMT and really psychedelic experience in general, I like to take a very somatic, embodied approach. I'm very interested in what is going on in the body. How do things present physically for people, as opposed to a more psychological approach. Also, very much with an emphasis on a phenomenological approach, which if you're not familiar with the fancy word phenomenological, what it means is the objective study of the phenomenon, where we are looking at what happened. We're not asking what does it mean, what's true, things like that, though that can come into it. But we're more looking at what are the different phenomena that people experience on 5-MeO-DMT and how do they relate to it, how do they react to it, and then how can we help them with those experiences. And of course, I always emphasize a non-dual approach, which I'll explain a little bit more as we get into the conversation here. But this is one of the major reasons why 5-MeO-DMT is so unique and has very different requirements and needs for people who are experiencing it, because it is primarily non-dual in nature, whereas most psychedelic experiences are not non-dual in nature. Okay? So I'm just going to try and breeze through some of these slides here. Let's see, do the next one. Okay, so who this webinar is for, and also I would say who the class that I offer through Mindscape is for. That of course this is focusing on people who want to be involved in aftercare with 5-MeO-DMT. So this is for people who are already working as therapists or are counselors. Maybe they have clients who are getting experience with 5-MeO-DMT and they want to learn not only what 5-MeO-DMT is, but how to relate to their clients or their patients and how to offer them informed reflection and counseling. So that could be psychedelic therapists, but also something that's happening more and more as people are getting more experience with psychedelic medicines is that they're going to their regular therapist and sharing some of their experiences there. And this is where there's a large disconnect between therapists and people having experience with 5-MeO-DMT. Also, this is for people who perhaps are already practicing as integration guides or integration coaches. As I mentioned, there are books and other training programs around psychedelic integration, but where they are lacking is that they don't really cover 5-MeO-DMT. So this is an area where people who are already in practice and providing these services, they can get a very, very comprehensive education around 5-MeO-DMT and how to help people with aftercare and how to guide them through their integration process. Another big one that I definitely get students from this area are people who are already serving or facilitating 5-MeO-DMT experiences. Maybe it's through a theogenic church, maybe it's an underground facilitator, maybe it's people who work at a retreat center. And I always like to emphasize that providing integration is ultimately a different role. It is a different service and requires different knowledge and skills than being a facilitator. And I love it when facilitators are really good on the integration side, but I also understand that not everybody who facilitates is equipped to do integration work. But for those who want to know more and want to start to apply some of these principles within their facilitation, I'm also of the opinion that if you can take the knowledge that I share in this class and start structuring your facilitation around some of these ideas and themes, it's ultimately going to make you a better facilitator. So I've worked with a number of facilitators in the integration class itself. And then just more broadly speaking, this is for anyone who wants to offer any kind of support for people with 5-MeO-DMT experiences after their session. Just to be really clear, because sometimes I do get asked this, no, the integration class is not a class on facilitation. I'm not here to train you to facilitate 5-MeO, though of course it's natural that questions and conversations within the class do come up around facilitation, and we do cover different styles and contexts of facilitation within the class. Our aim is not to be training facilitators, and a little bit later I'll tell you more about the facilitation training class that we have at Mindscape. Also, just like to really make this clear and put this up front, I myself am not a therapist, I'm not a clinician. This class is not a licensed class that teaches you any particular form of therapy or clinical practice. That would be something that you ultimately need to go to school for. And it's something that I try and steer people away from in offering integration services around 5-MeO, unless you already are a trained and licensed therapist. But it's important that people offering integration do not characterize themselves as therapists or present themselves to clients as though they are therapists. Also, this class does not provide any kind of experiential or hands-on training, meaning that we do not have a week or weekend where we meet together in person and consume 5-MeO-DMT or serve 5-MeO-DMT. That is not what this class does. We do have a portion that we have experiential training in the facilitation training class with Mindscape, but the integration class is not experientially based in that sense. Okay? So, just to tell you a little bit about myself and why I am teaching this class. You may or may not know me. If you don't know me, I've been in the psychedelic world for over 2 decades now. My first book on psychedelics is called Mushroom Wisdom, that was published in 2006. So officially I've been public for 20 years now. I got interested in 5-MeO-DMT when it was first served to me in January of 2008. And it was unquestionably the most powerful and profound experience I had ever had in my life. And I like to share that my immediate takeaway from the experience was that this experience that I just had with 5-MeO-DMT is the experience I had been looking for my entire life, but didn't know what it was and didn't know what I was looking for. But once I found it through 5-MeO-DMT, I was like, this is it. So at that point, I became a big proponent of 5-MeO-DMT and decided that back in 2008, almost nobody knew what 5-MeO-DMT was. I often share that when I would tell people about 5-MeO-DMT, the most common responses I got was, huh, what's that? Or, you mean DMT, right? Because everybody knew what DMT was, but nobody knew what 5-MeO-DMT was. But I decided that I want to tell the world all about this amazing molecule because this is the experience that, in my opinion, most likely every person on the planet is looking for in some way or another, whether or not they know it. So I started educating people about 5-MeO-DMT. My first avenue for doing that was the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, which has been active since 2008 and is still active. So it's one of the longest running podcasts in the world on the topic of entheogens and psychedelics. Also in 2008, I published a book by the same title, which was one of the first full-length treatments of 5-MeO-DMT available publicly. There was very, very little available in terms of books or public information about 5-MeO-DMT at the time. But that book is no longer in print. A lot of those materials have been reincorporated into later books. It was also at this time that I gave 5-MeO-DMT the nickname of the God molecule. I do like to share that people really didn't like it at the time, but apparently times have changed because now that designation for 5-MeO-DMT has been widely accepted around the world, and you hear and see people using that phrase of the God molecule all the time, particularly in news stories about 5-MeO because it reads really well, right? It's like, whoa, the God molecule, wow, what's that? Then that first experience with 5-MeO and then ongoing experiences with 5-MeO, it initiated a process of opening and transformation within me. And we don't have time to talk about that process here now, but the first result of that was in the summer of 2009. I wrote my book, Being Human, an Entheological Guide to God, Evolution, and the Fractal Energetic Nature of Reality. I'll just quickly show that to you here. That's this little book. And this is where I started articulating what I have called the entheological paradigm, which is my model for the nature of reality based on the idea that what I call radical non-duality, that there is only one being in consciousness, and this is a being in consciousness of energy, and that through instituting limits within itself, it permeates itself into what we experience as reality, where there is subject and object, and we are able to interact with ourself as this one universal consciousness through different embodied forms. And pretty much everything I've been doing and writing and speaking about since that book, Being Human, in 2009, has been an expansion and further exploration of the ideas that I first started articulating there, including this class and including this presentation. So also at that point, from 2009 to 2016, I developed a very unique approach to facilitating and working with clients with 5-MeO-DMT and also other entheogenic substances and molecules, but primarily 5-MeO-DMT. It was very much an exploratory and experiential practice, and I gave myself the title of being a non-dual energetic practitioner. I did that through the summer of 2016, and originally took 6 months off, and then at the end of those 6 months decided that I was done doing that and I wanted to focus more on educating people, not only about what I learned in that practice, but also just about 5-MeO-DMT in general, and give myself the permission to talk more openly, publicly about it, because I was no longer practicing. Because at that point, 5-MeO-DMT had become illegal. When I actually started, it was still legal to use and possess. There were no laws until 2011. Then in 2017, I wrote my book, Entheogenic Liberation, which pretty much comes 100% out of my practice as a non-dual energetic practitioner and therapist. It is widely considered to be the most comprehensive book about the 5-MeO-DMT experience and also how to work with it. It's still my most popular book, published in 2017. Then a couple years later, starting in the spring of 2019, after getting burnout of answering people's very, very long email messages about their 5-MeO experiences, and asking for my reflection and advice, something that had been going on for many, many years at that point, pretty much the last decade, I decided that I was going to become a professional non-dual integration guide and make my services available to the public, but I would charge for my time, and that's something that I've been doing ever since then. And in the 7 or so years that I've been doing this, I'd say about 80% of my clients are coming to me with 5-MeO-DMT experiences, and then smaller percentage of people from across the psychedelic spectrum. But I definitely I like to say I specialize in 5-MeO-DMT, but I'm not limited to that. And my clientele at this point really spans across the globe because 5-MeO-DMT is spread around the world. And I do like to emphasize that the demographic has very much shifted, that in the early years of all of this, only people who were deeply embedded in the psychedelic world and culture knew what 5-MeO-DMT was. And now we're getting lawyers, doctors, therapists, people, professionals, executives, people who didn't have a lifestyle in the psychedelic world who are now having experience with 5-MeO-DMT, including housewives, soccer moms, dads, kids, siblings, sometimes entire families go and have 5-MeO experiences together. And for a lot of people, actually, 5-MeO-DMT seems to be their very first entry into the psychedelic world and their very first psychedelic experience. So I like to emphasize that because it's important that you don't assume that people who are having 5-MeO-DMT experiences know a lot about other psychedelics or are embedded within psychedelic culture and share a lot of the beliefs and assumptions of psychedelic culture, that assumption is less and less true with every year because psychedelics are becoming more mainstream now. Then in more recent years, I have my book, The Entheological Paradigm, published that one in 2021. That's an updated version of an earlier book. Has a lot of the material from the original Entheogenic Evolution book from 2008. 2022, I published my anthology, Facilitating 5-MeO-DMT, which I like to say is not a how-to book. It is a book of how it's done, meaning that it has a variety of different people who facilitate with 5-MeO-DMT sharing their experiences of how they got into it and how they facilitate. But it's not necessarily a book of how to do it yourself. It's just looking at how different people approach working with it. Starting in 2024 is when I first began teaching with Mindscape Institute. We started there with the Trauma-Informed 5-MeO-DMT Facilitation course. We introduced my integration course after we had taught a couple rounds of the facilitation course. And the school director, Stephen Kirby, really urged me to do that after I published my 5-MeO integration book, which is this one right here. And he said, hey, you should just offer a class on this, and then you can go even more in depth in the class just on integration than we do in the facilitation course, because there it's just one section of a much larger course. Yes, my 5-MeO-DMT integration book, published that in 2024. And most recently, I published a short book. I originally made it for my students, but have made it publicly available, and it's the 5-MeO-DMT glossary, which just covers some of the standard terms and phrases and concepts around use of 5-MeO. Okay, so now we're getting more into the meat of it, of like, why is it important to offer a training specifically on 5-MeO-DMT? So I always like to emphasize that even though 5-MeO-DMT is classified as a psychedelic, it actually operates very, very differently than most other psychedelics. And it has a lot of unique properties, and this is where the standard approaches of what is considered integration with psychedelics tends to break down when we are dealing with 5-MeO-DMT experiences. So the first and most important one is that at a full release dose, where the ego completely surrenders and dissolves, is that 5-MeO-DMT is non-dual in presentation. So just to quickly explain, duality means there is a sense of separation. There is subject and there is object. There is me and there is the world, and that it's filled with a bunch of separate objects, and I myself am also separated from everything else. And that is filtered through the egoic construct of my sense of self, my self-awareness, where I say, hi, I'm Martin, this is me, and everything else is not me. But with a powerful 5-MeO-DMT experience, that sense of separation and boundary completely dissolves, and also perception of the outside world can also completely dissolve during this experience. At the practical sense, what that means is that people go through an ego death experience. They might feel that they are dying. They might feel that the exterior world is dissolving away. And even if people's eyes are wide open, they probably won't see the room that they're in. They won't see other people. They won't see objects anymore. And that they will also lose their sense of self. They won't know their name. They won't know their identity. They won't know that they have a body. And then they enter into the non-dual experience where there is no longer a sense of separation between subject and object. Other ways of describing that is that it's a unitive experience or unitary experience. It is an experience that we could use the language of merging with God or identification with God or merging with the universal consciousness and intelligence, and that it presents as singular, infinite, eternal, and unitary, that there is nothing else other than that. Most psychedelics do not generate this kind of experience. And if they do, tends to be extremely brief, where people describe, well, there was maybe like 10 seconds that I had that experience, and then the ego came back, reality came back. But with 5-MeO-DMT, you get extended periods of non-dual experience. So I like to say that 99% of all other psychedelic experiences are dualistic in nature, but 5-MeO is primarily non-dual, so therefore it's fundamentally different. It's also, like in contrast to say, here in Oregon, you can go to a psilocybin clinic and they can give you 3 to 5 grams of mushrooms and you get some eye shades and you lie down on a couch and you're there for 5 hours. And then 5 hours later, you take your eye shades off and you're able to talk about your whole experience and all the interesting things that you saw. 5-MeO tends to have a very dynamic somatic presentation, meaning that it's highly energetic in nature and people move around a lot. So though people can take it and just lie perfectly still, many people don't. It's very somatically active. And even if people are just lying there, they can also be experiencing convulsions in their body. They might be experiencing rapid vibrations of body parts, such as hands, feet, legs, arms. Also, people have lots of spontaneous movements where their body is doing things. There can be these yoga-like poses and movements that take place. There can be things that look from the outside. People describe it as that look like an exorcism. Also, people tend to be very active vocally. There can be screaming, there can be crying, there can be speaking in tongues or glossolalia, there can be toning, there can be throat singing, there can be wailing. There also can be all different kinds of purging that takes place. But in other words, there's a lot of stuff that's taking place in the body. This is very different than having a psychedelic session where you're just lying down peacefully on a couch for 5 hours. That this is something really, really dramatic. And it's important to note that in a lot of these somatic presentations, there is no egoic awareness that is present. So in other words, the person who is exhibiting these phenomenon doesn't even know that they're doing it, which again is very, very different than most other psychedelic experiences and presentations. Now, another very common feature, particularly of high-dose 5-MeO-DMT experiences, are what we in the field call whiteout and blackouts. So a whiteout is where somebody, let's assume that it's being vaporized, somebody takes a hit, and they say suddenly there was this bright white light, and then the bright light just took over reality and it just dissolved into oneness. Then the ego is gone. And then people often just use the language that they say, well, 20 or 15 minutes later, I woke up and I could see the room again. And I was tripping harder than I even thought it was possible to trip. But my ego's coming back. And then I realized I'm in a completely different place on the other side of the room and I'm not wearing any clothes. I don't know what happened in the intervening time period. So that would be a whiteout. A blackout is essentially the same kind of phenomenon, but where people say, again, their eyes might be wide open, and they say everything collapses into infinite blackness and darkness. And then 15 minutes later, I open my eyes, or suddenly I could see again. And again, I'm tripping harder than I even knew it was possible to trip, but I'm back in the room again. So we have these whiteout and blackouts where there can be a lot of somatic processing that takes place during this time period. There also could be the enactment of various unconscious egoic patterns might be on display during this time period, but the conscious part of the ego is dissolved, it is gone, and the person doesn't have any awareness of what took place during that time period. And if they have a good facilitator or witnesses, they will fill them in afterwards and describe, this is what happened, this is what took place. And all of that is super useful information. But again, this is very, very uncommon with most psychedelics. People don't have these whiteouts and blackouts unless, you know, maybe if they're on like 15 grams of mushrooms, they might have a blackout period, but otherwise it's super uncommon. And these, of course, are all related to the ego death phenomenon. And here it's important to distinguish that what most people in the psychedelic world refer to as ego death with other psychedelics, it's not ego death. That people say, yeah, I thought that I died, and then I found myself floating in cosmic space, and I saw all these other souls or these other beings, and I realized that I was in the, you know, the bardo or the in-between realm, and then later I went back into my body. That's not an ego death experience. An ego death experience is the complete dissolution of subject-object duality. So it's not the description of, yeah, I died and I went to heaven, and then I was floating around with all the other souls. That's a dualistic experience. It's not an ego death. An ego death is I took a hit, thought I was dying, felt everything dissolving, I merged with God, and then I was the universal being in consciousness for 15 minutes. And there was the possibility for all subject-object relationship there, but there was no thing there, and there was no identified individual self that was present. That's an ego death. And this is common on 5-MeO. And then also as the ego comes back online, usually within about 15 minutes if it's delivered via vaporization. But this also is just, it's a very unique experience with 5-MeO-DMT, and it also informs us that what most people consider ego death on other psychedelics doesn't really qualify as a full ego death experience. It's just an ego displacement experience. And I've kind of already mentioned this, but just to reiterate it again, that one of the most common descriptors of the 5-MeO-DMT experience is an infinite experience of energy. It is incredibly energetically powerful. I like to say at the energetic level, it goes from 0 to infinity in about 10 seconds if you're smoking or vaporizing it. And that is often accompanied by a loss of agency, where then again people are exhibiting spontaneous movements and processes in the body, but the ego is not in charge of it, and the ego is not even there to sometimes even be aware of what's happening. And also paradoxically, people can be aware of what's happening, but it's not filtered through the ego. So they know that these things are happening, but they would say, I wasn't the one doing it. So these movements, these things that were said, these things that happened, that was just the energy itself. Also, really unique with 5-MeO-DMT is we get this phenomenon of reactivations and ongoing energetic processing post-session. This is one of the things that, in general, people are very poorly educated around, meaning that many people who go for a session with 5-MeO-DMT, they haven't been informed about reactivations. Nobody told them about it, and it can be extremely scary for people. There's a whole range of what counts as a reactivation. We cover this in detail in class. But basically, a reactivation means the re-experiencing of a 5-MeO-DMT-like state without consuming any 5-MeO-DMT. And these tend to happen spontaneously. They can happen in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 a.m. And for many people, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish these reactivations from their direct experience of 5-MeO-DMT. But they're called reactivations because they are not, quote, flashbacks. It's actually pretty rare that someone goes back into the exact same state that they experienced in their session with 5-MeO. So in other words, somebody might describe their experience with 5-MeO-DMT as blissful and divine, and then as they're experiencing reactivations, they might describe them as horrific and hellish and terrifying. And these can happen for, in the normal time span is within about 2 weeks after having consumed 5-MeO-DMT, but they might not show up until months later, and sometimes people experience these for years. And it's a place that people definitely want help when it comes to integration. And just the ongoing energetic processing, people describe spontaneous movements in their body, they describe vibrations, convulsions, they think maybe they're having a seizure, but this is all just part of the ongoing energetic processing from having taken 5-MeO-DMT. Related to the non-dual experience is what we just call the mystical experience, where even if people don't dissolve fully into the non-dual state, these mystical experiences of a sense of this is some kind of fundamental level of reality, like this is the truth. This is, for some people, they describe it as an enlightenment experience. It's always temporary as a phenomenon, but these are very, very deep levels, and often in contrast to other psychedelics. Most people will describe their mystical experience on 5-MeO as more real, more revelatory, more impactful, and more profound than similar types of mystical experiences that they might have had on other psychedelics, and often as just beyond anything that they've experienced before. There's also the real potential for traumatic experience. This is generally true if the ego does not let go within a 5-MeO experience. Some people will describe it as hellish, as the worst decision they've ever made, something that they really regret. And it can be very, very challenging for people. And that's a lot of the people that you might get in an integration call because they're scared, they're nervous, they're desperate, and they're looking for help, and they're looking for reassurance. Also, the ontological shock. So ontology means the nature of reality, or what's real versus what's not real. And so the classic ontological shock on 5-MeO-DMT is you take somebody who's an avowed atheist, and then 20 minutes later they think, oh my God, I think I was really wrong. And not that they're becoming religious, because it doesn't necessarily lead to a religious position, but it is this sense of, you know what, I think maybe there is some kind of universal being and consciousness that is comprised of the energy of pure unconditional love. And I think maybe it's me and everyone else that I've ever known and everything I've ever experienced, including this moment right now. Whoa, that atheism, that was not right. And also, this means that people who are religious or spiritual often find that their spiritual or religious beliefs are severely challenged by their 5-MeO experience, because it doesn't really fit within any pre-existing religious or spiritual tradition. So it's very, very challenging for people that way, because it completely overturns your sense of what's real versus what's not real. And here's one of the big ones with 5-MeO, that a lot of psychedelic therapy is built around the idea that you, the client, you need to establish an intention for your healing session, and that as you work with your psychedelic substance, you keep reminding yourself of what your intention was. Yes, I wanted to heal my childhood trauma of the time my father tried to kill me. Didn't really happen to me. I'm just putting that out there as an example. And that you work with your psychedelic therapist to work through your intentions and reflect on your intentions, and then go over what did you learn about your intentions, what insights did you have, what processes did you engage with around your intentions. But here's the kicker. Intentions are only valid if the ego is present, because it is the ego that has an intention of what it wants to get out of its psychedelic experience or therapy. If there's no ego there, intentions are 100% irrelevant. And that's where working with 5-MeO, I like to say that your intention should be relax, surrender, trust, let go, and allow. Because you're going to be experiencing a massive experience of energy, and your thoughts and your intentions are largely irrelevant because you're going to quickly dissolve the ego, and whatever you think you wanted to get out of this experience, it's not really going to be relevant. So that means we have to have a completely different approach to how, not only how we're facilitating and preparing people, but how we are integrating them afterwards. Because we can't go in and talk about, well, how were your intentions? How did that work out for you? What insights did you gain? It's like, well, reality dissolved and it was all God. And then suddenly my ego was back and I didn't know who I was anymore. Okay. So why we need that. So that's from the 5-MeO side. But also another reason why we need more people who are skilled with integrating 5-MeO-DMT is, I don't know if you pay attention to the news, but currently there are now a number of clinical studies and trials happening in various places in the world. The United States, England, Ireland, some other places in Europe, where they are looking at 5-MeO-DMT for clinical purposes. And no surprise, what they're tending to find is that you get the best therapeutic and clinical results from large doses of 5-MeO-DMT, not just small little microdoses, but the full package. And there's the possibility that within the next couple years, we might be getting 5-MeO-DMT prescriptions for treating depression and anxiety and PTSD. And I guarantee you, if that becomes the case, we're going to need more people who are knowledgeable on integration and not just facilitation. So this is something that is happening, and it's happening rather quickly. I think currently in the United States, we have one 5-MeO-DMT trial that is in phase 3, which is pretty much the final phase. So this could be happening potentially very, very soon. And already, I mean, 5-MeO-DMT is currently illegal in the United States. It is not illegal in Canada. People can walk into a shop in downtown Vancouver and you can pick up a 5-MeO-DMT vape pen and you can get out on the sidewalk and you can take a big old rip of that and then find your entire reality dissolve. And so there's already a big demand. And also in Mexico, 5-MeO-DMT is not illegal. There are lots of retreat centers. Lots of people who serve 5-MeO-DMT. A lot of it follows what we call the fast food model or the McDonald's model of you show up, you sign up, you get your 5-MeO-DMT experience, and then they send you on out the door, and there is no integration whatsoever provided in a lot of these contexts. So again, we need more people skilled with integrating 5-MeO-DMT because the demand for it is only going up and it's only going to get larger. And keep in mind, we possibly are also headed towards legal psilocybin therapy, MDMA therapy. But here's the thing with 5-MeO-DMT, even if people have to go to a clinic to be served 5-MeO-DMT, just from a practical standpoint, you can only serve, realistically, you can only have one person served psilocybin over the course of a day with a guide or facilitator, because that will take 5 to 6 hours for the whole thing to process. 5-MeO-DMT, you can process an entire experience in under an hour. So the potential is we could have many more people, like just a logarithmic growth, and way more people having experience with 5-MeO-DMT than other legal psychedelic medicines, just because the time frame is much, much shorter. So there's a lot more potential for more people to be served, which again increases the need for integration. Okay, so now really what we're getting into is some of the material from the class itself with Mindscape. So this is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of my little slideshow presentation here. Integration with 5-MeO-DMT. I'm going to share with you what clients are looking for and what they feel they need. Also, what is I consider to be the necessary knowledge base, meaning what do 5-MeO integration specialists need to know? And also, we'll talk a little bit about what I don't think they necessarily need to know, or also what we don't necessarily cover in class. Then with integration with 5-MeO, I do like to break it down into 3 fundamental questions that most clients have. Again, keeping in mind that I've been doing this professionally for the past 7 years, and they pretty much all have the same kinds of questions. They want to know, they want to share their experience, and they're like, what was that? What happened? Like, this blows my mind. So they want to talk about it. They're going to want to talk about what's happening to them now. They're having reactivations. They're having identity fragmentation. You know, there are all kinds of things happening. And then they also want to know, what can I do with this moving forward? And keeping in mind that at this level of integration, a lot of people that I get are actually in a state of crisis because their facilitators have not educated them well, or they don't know who else to turn to, and they are desperate to talk to someone knowledgeable who can actually give them grounded reflection and advice and help reassure them that what they're going through is something that is expected and is understandable within the 5-MeO-DMT space. Okay, and then I'll give you some more specifics about the class. All right, next slide. Okay, so why clients seek out integration. I've got 8 different things listed here, and keep in mind that most people have some collection of these different topics that are on their mind. So the first is that everybody who has a powerful experience on 5-MeO-DMT, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whether it was just confusing, they want to talk about it. People want to talk about it. And in fact, people want to talk about it so much that a lot of people come on an integration call and they tell me, yeah, my husband, my wife, my friends, they're telling me to shut up because I won't stop talking about 5-MeO-DMT. So in essence, at the very least, they just want someone who can just hear their story and just listen to them and just be, yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. Because everybody wants to share about their 5-MeO experience because they're amazed and they're blown away. And a lot of people go through an evangelical period where they want to try and convince everybody they know to do it because they think it's the most amazing thing on the planet. And it is, but it usually doesn't go over well. So people just want someone to talk to about it. And they want someone who understands what they're sharing and is able to relate to them and say, oh yeah, I get it. Because I do like to say that this unitary non-dual experience on 5-MeO-DMT, even though you experience yourself as being one with everything and everyone, the ironic paradox is that it leaves you feeling incredibly socially isolated afterwards because no one who hasn't had the experience can relate to you. And in fact, a lot of people worry that they end up sounding crazy. And especially they think, God, if I go talk to my therapist about this, that my therapist is going to prescribe some medications and maybe suggest I visit the psychiatric institute or something like that. So again, they want somebody who's knowledgeable that they can talk to. And this is another place where, as I've already mentioned, most people offering psychedelic integration, if they're not educated about 5-MeO, it will just be as hard to talk to them as it would be to somebody who's not a psychedelic integration guide because it's just too different from other psychedelics. Another is a lot of people have had frightening or traumatic or just otherwise challenging sessions. Like people might have been screaming all through their session. They might have stripped off their clothes. They might have thrown up. They had these spontaneous, out of control body movements. And even if that wasn't frightening or traumatic in the session itself, it's still incredibly unusual. And people they're just left like with, what was that? Like, I can't even wrap my mind around like, what is it that just happened? And then there are people who, if the ego is not able to surrender, it can be incredibly frightening. I mean, I'm happy to say that it's a small minority of people, but every once in a while, I do get an integration client who tells me, I thought I went to hell, and it felt like I was in hell and being tortured, um, completely cut off from all love and all connection for an eternity. And it was the scariest, most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. And now I'm traumatized. Again, that's a small number of people, but it happens and they need someone to talk to. And it's very important that they get a chance to talk that out with somebody who is knowledgeable. As I've already mentioned, uh, there is the experience of reactivations, and a lot of people are super challenged by their reactivations. I have a quote here. I heard it again just earlier this week. I had a client who said this last week. So this is a really common expression where people jump on a call and they say, Martin, I think I broke my brain. And then they start to tell me, this is what's happening. I'm having these out of control experiences. And I'm able to let them know, oh, that's a normal part of working with 5-MeO-DMT. So like, so I didn't break my brain? Nope, I don't think you broke your brain, but it's an expression that a lot of people use because that's what they really think. And they're fearful at that point. And keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, even if somebody describes their experience with 5-MeO as beautiful and blissful and as just an incredible and amazing experience that they're so grateful for, that doesn't mean they're going to have an easy time with reactivations. And in fact, for a lot of people, it gets very, very challenging, even if their experience, they would not describe it as frightening or traumatic. But it's the after period that can be very frightening and traumatic for people. As I mentioned already, there's the ontological shock. People say, I'm not sure what's real anymore. I don't know who I am. I don't know. Like when people have the non-dual experience and they say, well, I think that means that I'm the same person as my wife. So is it okay for me to have sex with my wife or am I just masturbating? I mean, it gets confusing for people when the identities start to dissolve and these boundaries start to dissolve. Or they're like, I think I'm my dog. Like, what does it mean that I'm my dog? Am I still me? Like, then who's me? And then there can also be periods that people go through of depersonalization and derealization, where people say, I don't think I'm real, or I don't think reality is real anymore, or is reality all a dream, or is it not? What's going on? And then, of course, also, as I already mentioned, people coming from either a non-religious or even a religious or a spiritual background, most everybody will have their beliefs about what the nature of reality is challenged by a 5-MeO experience. And it has deep, deep impacts on people. There's also always the case that people might have had poor facilitation. And a lot of times what I am able to identify with my clients is that it's not that they were poorly facilitated for, but that the people who facilitated for them just didn't have enough experience. So a very common thing that arises in an integration call is that a client comes to me and they describe their experience and they describe what they're going through afterwards. And then they say, and I talked to my facilitator about it, and my facilitator said, I've never heard of anybody having an experience like this. I've never seen this before. So it must be you. This is super unusual. But when people recount their stories to me, because I'm very experienced, I'm able to tell them like, no, this is actually really normal. It just sounds like your facilitator just hasn't seen enough, is not experienced enough. But people are left hanging by poor or inexperienced facilitation, or even facilitation that doesn't offer any kind of integration afterwards or any kind of support afterwards. So that comes up a lot. In integration calls, I try not to get too critical about anyone's facilitation because we do want to keep in mind, I wasn't there, you weren't there, but also if people do feel that they were harmed or facilitated poorly for, it is important to validate their feelings, not so that they can then get into a battle with their facilitator, but just to acknowledge that, yeah, that sounds like that was not the best facilitation. Like, here's an example. Some people who facilitate like to have people stand up when they're served 5-MeO-DMT. I personally think that that is incredibly stupid. But I had a woman who said that she was told that she needed to stand up while she took her hit of 5-MeO, and that her facilitators said, "Don't worry, it's a trust fall. We will catch you." She took her hit. Nobody caught her. And she landed on the ground. So in a case like that, it's important to acknowledge, like, yeah, your facilitators did not do a good job. They did not care for you. Apocalyptic crisis and identity fragmentation. This is an interesting one. Sometimes people feel that they have made a bad choice and that somehow reality is now going to break apart and dissolve. So it can be very difficult for the ego to disentangle itself from the non-dual experience, because if we experience that I am reality at the deepest level, not the ego self, but the universal self, that maybe I've done something wrong. Sometimes people feel that they've broken reality, that they've broken themselves. And just as I've already mentioned with the ontological shock, that they could be going through a major identity crisis. Like if somebody says, look, I've been a devout biblical literalist and Christian my entire life. I've always believed that Jesus was my divine Lord and Savior, but I've just experienced that I am identical with God. I don't know how to be a Christian anymore. And so I can't relate to my family. I can't relate to my friends. I can't relate to my community. And this is actually super common with 5-MeO, that people's old identities, whatever it may have been, whether it's religious or not, can go through a really serious fragmentation and can leave people feeling like they are drifting through life, that they don't have an identity, and that it can be very scary and very frightening. They need support and they need reassurance. This phrase, I think I already used this so far in the presentation, that some people, because they're having a really difficult time afterwards, they're coming into an integration call and they're starting off by saying, taking 5-MeO-DMT was absolutely the very worst decision I ever made in my life. I'm afraid that I'm never going to get back to normal. I think I'm going insane. I think I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my relationship. My family doesn't want to talk to me. And I think I'm losing my mind and I need to check myself into a psychiatric institution. So a lot of integration at that level, really, I think I've said this before, it's crisis management with people who are in a very desperate, very, very vulnerable state, extremely sensitive. So this, again, is why we need people who are really skilled, who can meet them and say, hey, I've got you. I can walk you through this. I'm here with you. You're not alone. But people feel deeply, 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 deeply alone. And just imagine how bad it gets if then they say, yeah, I talked to my facilitator, and my facilitator said, well, I've never heard of somebody having a crisis like this, so it must just be you. And then people think, I've done something wrong. I am bad. I am a failure. So people compound that egoic self-judgment. And then another really odd one for people is, just like in the session with 5-MeO, people can experience loss of control over their body and emotions after a 5-MeO experience. And this can be part of the reactivation process, where somebody might say, look, I just tried to lie down, but as I was lying down, suddenly there was this burst of energy, and then my arms and legs started moving, and it's like something else is putting me into these weird yoga poses, and now I'm making all these weird tones, and my wife saw me and she thought I was going crazy, right? So these same kinds of somatic events that happen in the 5-MeO experience, they can show up spontaneously afterwards, and people feel out of control. And this tends to tie into people who say, I think I broke my brain because my body's doing really, really weird things, or I'm vibrating, or I'm convulsing. I don't know, am I having a stroke? Am I having a seizure? So there could be a lot of fear there. All right. So now we can talk a little bit more about what we cover in the class. So this is just kind of my list of, these are all the things that people who offer integration with 5-MeO-DMT, they need to know this stuff. It's super important. So first, this is true for anybody offering any kind of integration, is you need excellent listening and observation skills. And so I do try and teach that in class. So like, what does it mean to be a good listener? How do you structure an hour or a 90-minute long call with someone? What kinds of questions do you need to ask? What is the information that you're looking for? And then how do you actively listen? How do you make observations to see not only what is this person telling me, but how are they communicating it? And what does that tell me about their emotions? What does that tell me about their energy? What does that tell me about their experience? I think also this is completely vital, is you need to have some kind of working model of the ego, and you need to have some kind of working model of non-duality, meaning that you need to be able to talk to people about, if people say, well, I think that was my ego, you need to help them identify, yes, was that your ego? How does the ego function? How does it work? And how does it dissolve? How does it reconstitute? How does it go through this process of dissolution, non-dual experience, and major energetic flooding through the body? And just having a psychological model of the ego is really, it's not good enough. And we need to, by working model, what I mean is not just concepts and ideas, but we have to understand how it relates to people's experience and how we can help them identify what's going on within their process. And I always like to emphasize the word process. This is not just about the experience, it's about the entire process of what happened. When did the ego let go? How did it let go? Did it resist? How did it resist? Did an unconscious part of the ego take over? What happened when it did? Then if that let go, what happened next? Was there a non-dual experience? If so, how did it present in the body? What did the ego do when it came back? Did you like what the ego did when it came back? Or is that something that you want to change? Were you able to observe it? And then how do you identify as both the non-dual nature of the self and also as the egoic sense of self? And I always like to share, keep in mind, we are not trying to kill the ego. We're not trying to get rid of the ego. What we're looking for is a healthy, balanced, integrated individual. And an ego is an important part of your sense of self, but we want a healthy ego. I like to say killing your ego is like saying, I'm going to become more enlightened if I cut off my hand. Like, I use my hand for a lot of stuff. I'm even holding a pen. Like, I wouldn't be able to write if I cut off my hand. And trying to get rid of your ego on a permanent basis, the only thing that wants to do that is the ego. So we need these working models to help people understand what this process is about. You also need to have an education that is detailed of the spectrum of 5-MeO-DMT phenomenology. You need to know what is normal, even if not everybody experiences or demonstrates these kinds of phenomenon on 5-MeO-DMT. Because this is a place where people want a lot of reassurance, and they want, again, to talk to somebody who said, yeah, well, when I started screaming, like, is that normal? Do people, why was I, and I don't even know why I was screaming, but what was that about? So they want help understanding what actually took place. Because I take a very embodied approach, and because 5-MeO-DMT itself is extremely embodied, we need to understand the somatics of non-duality via 5-MeO-DMT. In other words, how do bodies respond to this very powerful energetic modality? This is where it's totally different. Like, some people have a non-dual experience when they're sitting cross-legged and meditating, and they're just very, very peaceful. Well, that's great. I actually think that what happens on 5-MeO is deeper and bigger than that. But if people have a non-dual experience where suddenly their bodies are opening up and then they're writhing and they're moving and it's all one, it's a very somatic experience. That this is not the mind-centric approach of meditation, of I'm going to quiet the mind and then reveal the true nature of the self. No, this is a deeply embodied, I like to say it's energetic shock therapy for the ego. but it's a very embodied and very somatic process. So we need to understand that and be able to work with people. And also that applies for how we coach people afterwards for how to continue to work with the energies through the reactivations, that it's not about figuring things out, it's about embodied energetic practices and exercises. So we spend a lot of time on that in the class. We also need to know, how is the ego embodied? How does it demonstrate through the body? What is it like when the ego is feeling resistance or feeling fear versus when the ego is relaxing and opening up? That this also helps people to identify then what is happening afterwards. Is this the raw energy or is this my ego? And if it's my ego, and if it's something that I want to change, if it's a unconscious pattern or habit, then how is that being embodied? How is that being expressed? It's all about the embodied approach and the somatics. Also, we need to understand what is the variety of experiences from what we tend to call a handshake, which means a small dose of 5-MeO, all the way up to what we call the full release dose of 5-MeO, and also where that non-dual threshold is and how everything that is beyond the non-dual threshold is fundamentally different and unique from everything that occurs prior to the non-dual threshold. So we need to understand all of these different phenomenon at these different levels. And I always put an emphasis on the full release because, let's just be honest, very, very few people come for an integration session with 5-MeO from a small or medium dose of 5-MeO. Almost everyone who's looking for integration is because they've had the full release, they've had a non-dual experience or something in close proximity to it, and that's what they need the most help with. But we still need to understand what is the range of experience with these different doses. And not only that, but we need to know what are the different facilitation styles and the different methods and the routes of administration, because all of these can have an impact on people's direct experience as well as what is happening afterwards. And overall, we need a rich library of knowledge around the empirical, observable 5-MeO-DMT phenomenon. Again, with this idea of helping people understand what's normal, and even though it might be rare, some kind of experience that somebody has, that it's within the realm of what we know and what we can understand. So all of that is what is taught in the class. What I don't teach in the class is your personal depth of experience with 5-MeO-DMT. Kind of the assumption is that anybody who takes the class, that they probably have experience with it. I don't really think it's possible to offer good integration for somebody if you haven't had experience with 5-MeO-DMT, because then you're just repeating stuff, but without an actual experiential basis. But this class doesn't teach you how to experience 5-MeO. Though you will learn a lot in this class about how you may want to work with 5-MeO for your own experience. Also, what I highly recommend, because 5-MeO has spread around the world, it is not limited to any particular culture, ethnicity, or demographic, is that I do think it serves you to have familiarity with diverse cultures, traditions, and also different religions, different spiritualities, because people come from all different kinds of backgrounds. And they will tell you, like, well, you know, I was raised Orthodox Jew, but for a while I was practicing Taoist alchemy, and then I got into Vipassana, but now I'm doing internal family systems therapy in conjunction with a little transcranial magnetic stimulation. And it's helpful if you can say, gotcha, I know all those references, I know what you're talking about, but we don't have time in the class to cover all of that. Also recommended that you have awareness of current events in the field, like being aware that 5-MeO-DMT nasal spray is in phase 3 clinical trials. It's coming. And also be aware of what's happening in the world. Like if somebody says, yeah, there was just major flooding in my neighborhood here in Hawaii, and I'm feeling a bit traumatized by that. You know, it's good to know, like, yeah, there was just a hurricane in Hawaii. Or somebody says, yeah, all of my family actually is back in Iran. It's good for you to know, like, oh, so you're probably a bit concerned for them right now, right? So you should be aware of current events and things that are happening in the world. a lot of people in the psychedelic world like to say, yeah, I don't pay any attention to the news. It doesn't serve you as an integration guide. It's important to know what's happening and how people are being impacted or potentially traumatized by current events. Also recommend that you have familiarity with contemporary therapeutic modalities. Again, this is not a class to teach you to be a therapist. I don't encourage you to try and be a therapist, but many people who seek out 5-MeO as well as other psychedelics usually have a history of attending to their anxieties, fears, or traumas through various therapeutic modalities. And it's good to get that background information when you have an integration call with them. And it's good to have some ability to relate to them. Again, you don't need to know everything inside and out, but it's helpful if somebody says, well, I've been working with an IFS therapist for the past 2 years. It's good if you know that IFS means internal family systems and you have some understanding of how that works. Because people will use this language and these references a lot in an integration call. So again, you don't need to be a therapist, but it's good to know what is current within the therapeutic landscape because people will be referencing it all the time. Okay, here's the part where what's not necessary. Being an integration guide does not mean that you need to have a lot of fancy metaphysics or beliefs. You also do not need to be a ritual or ceremonial expert, and you don't need to be encouraging people to pray or make offerings or how to hold ceremony. You do not need to have a fixed spiritual or health outcome. Oh, yes, you will be enlightened and ascend to the highest level. Or, oh, I'm sorry you have cancer. Well, if you just work with 5-MeO the right way, you will be cancer-free. You definitely don't need a lot of new age interpretation or meaning making, like, oh yeah, this is going to activate your DNA, which will then open up the chakra in your third eye, and that you will be able to, telepathically communicate with your alien brethren. You don't need any particular spiritual or religious ideology. You don't need your own specific therapeutic approach. A lot of people in the integration space, I see them confusing lifestyle coaching and wellness influencing for integration. It's not. Those things are great, but that's not integration. Like sometimes I get clients who say, yeah, well, I talked to my integration guide and about all these experiences that I'm having from my 5-MeO, and they told me that I should eat real food and walk outside barefoot, right? That's like wellness influences, like great. And I'll guarantee you, no one feels that helps them, okay? Because those are just like little wellness band-aids that people are getting thrown at them. Or, yeah, my integration guide told me that I should meditate more. You know what? If people are having reactivations, meditation is usually not a good prescription because they're going to have more reactivations and they're going to get more anxious and more nervous. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the integration world with combining it with lifestyle coaching and wellness influencing. And it's just kind of a pet peeve of mine because I find that it's just super superficial and almost never helps people. Also, the idea of chasing breakthroughs, like sometimes people will say, well, I don't think I really surrendered all the way and I really want to. And it's important to remind people that it's about the process, and everybody's process is different and unique. And that's why we're having this integration call to see like where you are within your process, but it's not were you successful or not? Did you have a non-dual experience or not? And then also super popular in the psychedelic world these days is this idea of downloads that, yeah, I want to receive all these insights and I want to download all this information. And my honest opinion of that is that that's just mostly the ego trying to make itself feel important and intelligent. But downloads just, they don't have a place in 5-MeO integration. Okay. Okay, so this is returning to the point that I made before. Just go through this really quickly, that lots of people on the integration side, that they are coming with this primary question of, here's my story, is this normal? And so they want to go through their experience itself, and they want help understanding what happened. I spend a lot of time reviewing people's actual experience and then helping them understand, not interpret, not make meaning, not give them spiritual guidance, but just help them understand, because this is a dramatic, dynamic process and experience, and it's outside of most people's range of normal. So they just want help understanding it. They also need to review what is happening to them now afterwards. And again, people always want to know, like, is this normal? Is it normal for people to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and feel like they're blasting out into cosmic space? Like, I'm really terrified. Again, I think I broke my brain. I'm really terrified. Is this normal? So having that knowledge base to be able to reassure people, yes, this is normal, and I'm going to teach you how you can work with it now, rather than fighting with it or being afraid. And that's the part of what you can do with it, right? How do we live with this as an embodied experience? And again, my approach is very somatic. It's very embodied. I'm not promoting ideas, doctrines, metaphysics, or beliefs. It's all about what's going on in your body and how are you expressing yourself and allowing this energy to move and work within you. So quickly, about the class itself, it's broken down into 3 main sections. The week 1 is just the introduction, where we go over the origins of the entheological paradigm, which is my overall model that I have developed for how all of this makes sense, and how I developed my non-dual energetics and the embodiment process, and then sharing my own story, because this all comes from my own direct experience. This isn't anything that I learned from anyone, anywhere, and back in 2008, there wasn't anyone to learn from, because nobody knew what 5-MeO-DMT was. I had to find my own way, and have been helping others ever since then. Weeks 2 through 5 really focus on the phenomenology of 5-MeO experiences, as well as the styles and history of different facilitation contexts and modalities, different settings that people might experience 5-MeO in, different routes of administration and the different phenomenology that arises from that, and also the spectrum of post-session effects and phenomenology. And then all of it is treated through a non-dual lens, an embodied energetic non-dual lens. And then in weeks 6, 7, 8, and 9, then we actually get into what is it to run an integration session, what are the kinds of questions, what are the resources that we're using, how are we advising people, how do we work with people. All throughout the class, I bring in real life case studies. It's usually what, whoever I talk to within the past week, I usually bring in, so I talked to this person, so we get to actually talk about real life cases. I have a huge library of real cases. And then also various resources for anybody working within the field. So in addition to the text, we've got a lot of supplemental materials. I've got PDFs with questions and all the rest of that to really prepare people. And the idea is that if you go through this class, you will be ready to then set up shop and start offering integration calls with people pretty much right afterwards. So you'll get training with an embodied non-dual energetic framework, full spectrum of 5-MeO-DMT phenomenology, a clear structure for guiding clients through sessions, what to ask, what matters, and again, as I mentioned, like the listening skills, observational skills. You'll be able to offer grounded reflection and guidance. You'll be able to set up and run your own practice. One of the benefits of doing integration versus facilitation is there's no legal restrictions. You don't have to worry about setting up an entheogenic church in order to legally serve 5-MeO in the United States or something like that. And as I've already been mentioning, that in theory, you'll be ready for prescription 5-MeO-DMT, which seems like it might be coming very soon. Quickly, because people always ask this, so we do have the 5-MeO-DMT facilitation course with Mindscape Institute. I do take students in both classes. So I'm one of the primary instructors for the facilitation course, but I'm not the only instructor. We do have a trauma-informed approach for that class. So the focus is quite different. We do cover integration in the facilitation course, but this is a much more in-depth and expanded view of integration within the integration course. So I do have students who take both of those classes. If you are taking both classes, we have unique books and resources and additional materials for each class, so there's not a lot of overlap between the two. I do offer a $500 discount for anybody who's taken the facilitation course or currently enrolled at Mindscape. But the facilitation course is quite a bit longer, so it's a much bigger commitment. And as you just can see from the list here, I don't need to read through all of it. It goes through everything from understanding your role as a facilitator, how to do medical screening, how to do intake, how to do preparation, how to set up your facilitation space, how to facilitate, then also how to offer integration, how to offer support. So it covers the whole preparation, facilitation, and integration, and all those different aspects. Whereas this class is much more focused just on we're offering integration, and also with the idea that from the integration course that you can be working with clients that you have not served 5-MeO to, whereas in the facilitation course, a lot of the integration training that we give there is prefaced around the assumption that you're offering integration for people that you have also done all the preparation and education and facilitation for. And that's a somewhat of a different practice. So this is more for standalone clients. But again, if you're a facilitator, this will give you a lot of knowledge and information for directly offering integration for the clients you facilitated for. These are the books that we use in the integration course. Again, they are different from the books that we use in the facilitation course. So you get to read different stuff and different supplemental materials as well. These, of course, are available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. So even if you don't take the class, you can get these books, and probably some of you have already read these books, but we'll be going through them in detail in the class itself. This next class starts on September 9th. It lasts for 9 weeks, so it runs through November 4th. It is Wednesdays, roughly at this time period, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. There's a $500 discount for Mindscape students or alumni. $500 deposit reserves a spot. There is the little graphic there. You can use your phone and pink. You can go directly to link to register for the class. There's only 2 spots left in the class for the next round. When we originally set up this webinar, there were 7 more spots left, but as of this morning, there's only 2 more spots left. But don't hesitate to reach out. I will be offering this again in the late winter or early spring next year. So we'll be happening again, but there's only 2 spots left for right now. And if you want to email me, martinwball@gmail.com, martinball.net/courses to sign up for the class. And of course, as just an ongoing resource is the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. You can find it on Spotify, YouTube, at my website, martinball.net. And actually at the Entheogenic Evolution on YouTube, there's a lot more materials than just what goes out on the podcast. So a lot of additional stuff there. And now we've got a little bit of time for a little question and answer. Sasha is probably thinking, Martin, that took you longer than it was supposed to. You should have left more time for question and answer. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and maybe we get to some questions. Thank you guys all for attending this presentation and webinar. I hope you found it to be illuminating for you, regardless of whether you want to take the class or not. Hope you learned something. All right, I'm going to stop that screen share, and we can open it up.
Yeah, wonderful. Martin, so if anyone has questions, use the little react button. What I will start off with, some of you left some questions while registering for this webinar. So Martin, first question was, will we have access to recording if we miss a live webinar? Yes, we're recording this, so it's wonderful. I could answer that. That's a good one. What are some of the more subtle things you look when screening clients?
Well, so that would be more of like a facilitation question, because that when we are actually serving someone, that there are things that you do want to look for. So, but I'm not really going to answer that question now because it's kind of out of the scope of what we're dealing with here. I do want to say that in terms of integration, um, I definitely don't screen anybody there. But I do think it's very important that anybody who offers integration, that you make your approach very clear and upfront so that when clients come to you, they know what to expect. Um, like for example, one time I did get a client who um, afterwards she sent me an email and she said, "I can't believe that you didn't tell me to keep a journal." And kind of my response was, well, she obviously didn't look into how I offer integration services because I don't recommend people journal. That's not what I do. I take an embodied somatic energetic approach. Journaling is something different. But I do think that it's important to um, with potential clients that if you feel that they're not a good fit for you, that you should be able to say that. And also if they feel that they're not a good fit, that you might want to direct them towards somebody else. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for coming, Miles. I see you're leaving. Thanks. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Another question. How do psychedelics dissolve boundaries, and what is your understanding of trauma-sensitive integration work? Thanks.
Yeah. So it dissolves boundaries because we have habitual energetic patterns that exist within our bodies. And this relates to not only the brain and our neurological pathways, but also how things are embodied and expressed. That I always like to say that the ego is a collection of patterns of energy that give rise to the character of your sense of self. So it is not just your thoughts, it's not just your beliefs, it's not just this abstract sense of your identity, but it's the ways you use your body, it's how you express yourself, it's your tone of voice, it's your habitual patterns of expression and embodiment. And taken all together, that the ego is a collection of these patterns of energy, beliefs, emotions, thoughts, and patterns of expression. So when we take psychedelics, most of them, what they do is that they interact with our emotional system, our thinking system, our neurology, and it creates new patterns and new connections, or creates new pathways which these different aspects of the self relate to each other. So many people experience that as a softening of boundaries, where it's like, oh, I'm having new thoughts, or I'm able to relate to this person or their experience in a new way. 5-MeO is unique because not only it doesn't just alter or soften these patterns, but it has the potential to completely dissolve them. And from a neurological perspective, when that takes place, the brain is going into gamma wave states. And gamma waves are the highest energy, most coherent brain waves that our brain can produce. And it also correlates with the dissolution of the sense of the egoic self. And so most of the time when we're awake, we're usually in alpha or beta waves. And then when we're relaxing or meditating or dreaming or sleeping, we're in delta and delta, or theta and delta. And these are the two brainwave states that a lot of psychedelics produce, is theta waves and delta waves. Most psychedelics don't push the brain into gamma waves, but 5-MeO does, and that seems to correlate very strongly with the non-dual experience, which also then is the complete dissolution of sense of egoic boundaries and identity. So that's just a snapshot of how that works.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Is there anything to do with the whiteout? I don't remember the experience.
Yeah. So as mentioned, whiteouts are very, very common, but there are things that people can do. One of the things that I recommend is that you can actually work to sort of induce a reactivation by lying down in open symmetry. If there was music that was played in your session, it can be really helpful to get the same music and play the same music. If there was a video recording of your session, it can be really good to watch the video, and then if you made any sounds or engaged in any movements or had any somatic processes that you don't remember, if you can start to kind of imitate those now, because even though your ego doesn't remember, your body actually does remember. And so if we can sort of replicate some of the same conditions, that can bring some of that stuff back into memory for people. And that a lot of people will describe that they don't remember what happened during their whiteout. But it might even be months later where some feeling arises where suddenly it's very similar to when you had a dream but you don't remember it, but then months later something happens and you're like, oh wait, I had this dream. So that can happen with whiteouts and with blackouts, but the most direct route would be working to induce embodied recall. And again, your body actually remembers the event even if you are not conscious of it. So if we start to do intentional somatic work, we can bring out more recall. And also, it's important that I do like to counsel people that it's not necessary for you to remember the experience. And I know that that can be disappointing for the ego because the ego's like, oh, I missed it. But I do like to point out that every night you go to sleep and your ego goes away, and then your body repairs itself and you get rested and renewed, and you wake up, hopefully in the morning, better able to face the day. And that the ego, because it is so relentless, getting it offline, even for a 15-minute time period, is actually deeply regenerative for the self and for the body. And you can still reap a lot of benefits, even if you don't have conscious recall. But it's a common complaint, it's a common issue. And sometimes it can also be, well, if you keep working with 5-MeO, you'll learn how to decouple awareness from an egoic perspective. And then it's also common that people remember more from earlier sessions. They're like, oh, yeah, this is what happened, but you're able to retain more recall. But that can take a little bit of practice and a little bit of coaching.
Okay, thank you. Do you find that there's a significant therapeutic difference between synthetics, 5-MeO-DMT, and Bufo?
Significant? No. I think that ultimately, I think synthetic 5-MeO is probably a little bit higher on the therapeutic value because it is purer and it is much easier to regulate dosage and therefore much easier to engage in a therapeutic protocol versus if you're working with toad secretions, it is always a guess as to what the actual dose is. And because it is a complex molecular cocktail, there's always the potential that some of those other ingredients might interact with your biochemistry in a way that is unpredictable or negative. And this is why all the therapeutic studies of 5-MeO-DMT are being done with the pure molecule, with the synthetic molecule. There's not a single therapeutic study being done around bufo secretions just because it's not very practical as a therapeutic agent or modality. Um,
Yeah.
but overall, you get extremely similar results. I've always put out the challenge that if we only had the data of somebody's session without knowledge of where they served toad or where they served pure molecule, there is no possible way for anyone to distinguish one or the other because the phenomenon and the results are identical, that there's no major significant difference between toad and pure molecule 5-MeO-DMT.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any specific integration advice for AUDHD neurotypes? In particular, I'm curious about the intersection of reactivations and autistic sensory sensitivities, and if there are any established best practices for using 5-MeO-DMT for supporting neurodivergent people seeking to be more aware of their bodies and supporting them through their experiences, even if it's initially highly re-traumatizing.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big question. And I will say that this is an area that I would encourage, no one here in the audience, I would encourage researchers to please research that question. Because I definitely have had clients who would identify as being neurodivergent and potentially on the autism spectrum. And it can, keeping in mind that it's a spectrum, this is why we just can't give like a really easy answer, because it's a spectrum and people are very divergent with on that spectrum in terms of what they experience, what phenomenon and what challenges they have. But overall, the one thing that I would say is that the studies that have been done looking at neurochemistry and also brain structures and 5-MeO-DMT is that 5-MeO-DMT appears to be very good for the brain. And that is a very interesting question of, can this perhaps be used to treat people who are neurodivergent or people who have dementia or people who have Alzheimer's, that it seems to grow new neural networks. It's almost like fertilizer for the brain. So it seems to be very healthy in that way. But with people who have strong stimuli sensitivities, 5-MeO, I mean, there's no way around it. 5-MeO is super, super intense. And so it potentially could be very traumatizing, could be very challenging for people. I think the best approach would be a low and slow approach, who anybody who is on that spectrum, so that you can really carefully gauge. And here I'll just make a clear case for, I would definitely recommend pure molecule over toad for anybody on the spectrum, because again, you want to be very careful with actual dosages and really monitoring that closely. But I think it's a very important question. I myself don't have a lot of clear answers on that, but would like to see a lot more research, because I think it's a very important question, and I think that it's going to give us a lot of unique information.
Thank you. So now I have to split this one up here, Martin, because this person had like that's the last question blocked, but there's several questions. Does 5-MeO offer positive effects on a microdose schedule as psilocybin does? Would the newly acquired Eli Lilly platform be applicable if so?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to distinguish, quote, microdosing 5-MeO versus microdosing psilocybin or microdosing ibogaine or microdosing ayahuasca. Most microdosing protocols are used with the assumption that that molecule is going to be in your system for a number of hours and therefore has a deep impact over the course of your day. Your body metabolizes 5-MeO-DMT extraordinarily quickly. And so if we're talking about a microdose, like a very small dose of 5-MeO, really that is only in your system for probably about 5 minutes at the very most. So the idea of, well, my microdose is going to like take me through the day, that's just not the way that the body metabolizes 5-MeO. But in the sense that there are now various groups and people who promote low dose 5-MeO as part of a daily meditation practice, that's where we're seeing people using low dose 5-MeO as a microdose, in the sense of, I'm not just taking a little dose and then going about my day, but I'm taking a little dose and then I'm doing yoga, or I'm taking a little dose and then I'm meditating. But it's important to note that in a lot of those contexts, it is numerous small doses over a confined set of time. So it's like you're doing a half an hour meditation, you might take 5 to 10 small hits of 5-MeO over that time period, because again, you metabolize it super quickly. So it doesn't really fit into what people think of as a microdose protocol that's going to have a lasting impact over the course of the day or the course of a week. So yes, you can take very small doses, but just it's important to understand that it's not what we're thinking of when people generally say microdosing, or for the reasons that they might take it.
Yeah.
And then what about the Eli Lilly question? Which,
I think the question was related to it if the newly acquired Eli Lilly platform would be applicable, but Again, my understanding, the trials are all around large doses, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
the trials that are being done, some of them do separate it out into low dose, medium dose, and then large dose. But the results are that for people with PTSD, depression and anxiety, or substance abuse or trauma, they are getting, they are reporting the best effects from the large dose. And that 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 would be done, like if it's a prescription nasal spray, that would be done on an ad needed basis, but that's definitely not microdosing. And um, it's also the idea that a large experience tends to produce an afterglow that can last for a number of weeks or even potentially a number of months. So this is not the idea that you're doing the 5-MeO nasal spray every day to deal with your depression and anxiety, which again, a microdose schedule is roughly every day or every several days so that you're getting an ongoing treatment for anxiety or depression. This is more of a large dose treatment that is administered much more sparingly.
okay. How, and that's the second part question, and then I think we're done and we're switching over to the people who raised their hand and are still
Okay.
waiting for us. I really appreciate that. How soon after a session would you advise a five recipient to attempt integration? And then this person also adds this, I've done 5-MeO 4 times and benefit, but I feel I missed the integration opportunity. I would have enjoyed immediate discussion followed by round two.
Yeah. Okay. So here, what I want to do is distinguish between coaching and feedback and integration. That the model that I like to use with 5-MeO administration is 3 large dose rounds back to back with a client with potential coaching and feedback in between rounds to help people maximize the potential of the energetic arc of the entire experience and focusing on it as a process and what kind of targeted coaching and feedback can we give between hit number 1, hit number 2, and hit number 3 to bring the person as far away through that process as possible. Now, so that's coaching and feedback. And then often after a session, people will want to talk about it immediately. But I don't really consider that integration. The integration is more about dealing with what comes next. Now, here, like I often will get this from clients where they say, hey, I have a session with 5-MeO scheduled for next Friday. Can I talk to you that afternoon? What I will respond with is, if you want to have a conversation that afternoon, I'm more than happy to talk to you that day. However, if you only want to have one conversation with me, I do recommend that you wait a few days until scheduling the integration call. And the reason for that is that many people don't start to experience reactivations or challenges until several days after their session with 5-MeO. So it's super common for people to say, yeah, the day after was great. And then the day after that, I was just floating on cloud 9. And then night number 3, I woke up at 3 a.m. in an absolute state of terror. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So if we do an integration call too soon after a session with 5-MeO, we might miss some of the potential challenges that are going to arise later. And then that person is either just going to miss out on that feedback and integration, or they're going to have to book another call. So that's why I like to be really upfront with clients that, like, look, if you only want to have one conversation, let's schedule it for a couple days after. Okay.
Okay, I think we're coming now to the questions. I think Warren was first, but I think since we're ladies first, we're going to say, Catherine, you have a question, right? You have to unmute. Oh, you're unmuted.
Yes.
Are you
Hi.
unmuted? Yes.
Catherine?
I have a kind of a two-part question. First, I'm enrolled in the next Mindscape cohort for 5-MeO facilitator training in September. Is the integration piece included in that program? That's
Yeah.
the first question I have.
Yeah.
Or is this something that I would need to purchase separately?
Um, yeah. So this specific course is a completely different course. Um,
Okay.
we do teach integration, and actually, I personally teach a lot of those classes in the facilitation course. But I do point out that we do work from different materials in the course. So this integration class is more my specialized approach. And in the facilitation course, because we do frame it as trauma-informed facilitation, that we do take a bit more look at that within the integration side. And also, there is the idea that when we're offering integration for somebody that we've facilitated for, it's different than just working with a cold client who, okay, I need to get your background information, need to explore all these different topics. So um, there is some overlap, but overall the classes are very compatible if they're taken together. But absolutely, we do cover integration in the facilitation course. We don't leave that out. But just know that the
Good.
materials and approach is a little bit different, though I do teach most of those classes personally.
Right. Okay. Second thing, the one of the things for me specifically, so for the last 9.5 years, I've been a hypnosis practitioner working with people one-on-one. I myself have had, I don't even know, countless sessions for myself in my own journey. Prior to that, it was, everybody's journey is kind of a stepping stone to the next place. Um, and of course, I've been working with psychedelics for the last 7 years, but not with others. However, one of the reasons I'm taking the course is because of how much, I hate to say faster, but for lack of a better word, it's a faster approach
Yeah.
than me sitting there working with people for, it's kind of like the psilocybin route, right? So when I do a session for someone, we have 2 hours where they're just talking to me about what they want to do. And then we have the session and then we have a debrief. So the integration piece is something that I've always added on as like, if you need help kind of like breaking it down or whatever. But obviously with psychedelics and especially with 5-MeO, I find that the integration piece is going to be an integral part because I myself have experienced like with 5-MeO, I was one of those people where I had my first, it was the most traumatic experience of my life. Like I was like, what the
Well,
was that?
Yeah.
And then once that ego dissolution happened, then the beauty came. And I was on the cloud nine, and I wound up actually having like three reactivations where I was really back in it in the middle of the night and didn't really know how to process that. So the integration piece is really fundamental for me. So I'm currently trying to consider like how to structure that. Like when you're working with people with integration, do you just do like one call at a time and let them call you, or do you offer them some sort of like, I offer integration support for people's experiences for a month, 3 months? How does that work? Or what is your suggestion around that?
Yeah, so that's where it really depends on the facilitator. Like some people who facilitate, they like to kind of check in with people and to see how they're doing, but they don't actually want to offer the integration. So they kind of farm it out to other people. I think that
Right.
that's totally legitimate. Um, People who do have a regular facilitation practice also often establish like integration sharing circles for like, okay, once a month or once a week or whatever, anybody who's been facilitated for can come in and share, and that can be powerful for people. But I do like to point out that often for people who are having really challenging experiences, they're usually not comfortable sharing in a context like that. uh,
Sure.
because it could just be intimidating if everybody's talking about, oh, it was so beautiful, and oh, it's like, and mine was horrifying. Because again, a lot of people think that they've done something wrong. um,
Yeah.
but overall, as a facilitator, I think it's important to either make, here's a referral, or to offer integration, and that it can be a lot of times people just need reassurance and guidance for what they're going through. So, like, having one call can be super effective for people. Like, I like to share that often with my own clients, I can just see at the beginning of the call, there's like, oh, they're just, oh, this is too much. And by the end of the call, there's like, oh my God, I feel so much better. You can just see people melt. And so a lot of it is just giving them that reassurance. Now, this also where if you're a really conscientious facilitator, you're doing a good job of educating people so that then they're not freaking out because the stuff that happens afterwards, they've been told to expect it and maybe even given some advice ahead of time about how to work with it. So I do like to point out that for myself, I do get a lot of extreme cases because many of my clients are like, I don't know who else to talk to. So I see a lot of like really extreme cases. But when you're a facilitator, you will find that some people will just be, they'll be cool. Like, yeah, I don't really need to do an integration. I'm okay. I'm doing fine. So I don't think that we should force people, but it's important just to make the offering. And then you will get people who are very desperate. But it is about finding what's comfortable for you. I do know some facilitators who are like, you can call me anytime, day or night. I will jump. You can text me as much as you want. I recommend having boundaries because
Yes, I was gonna say I can't do that.
yeah,
No.
because you will get clients who will then abuse it.
Yeah.
Not that they want to be abusive, but that they're
Right.
like writing you at 3 a.m. saying, "Can I call you right now?" And that's where it's like, but see, if you've done a good job educating and preparing them, then they'll know not to do that.
Right.
So it really, there's not like a solid standard there about what is required of a facilitator in terms of integration. And so, in the class, we definitely explore this idea of we're going to tell you what we think are some of the best practices, but you're going to have to find what really fits for you and where you want to draw the line. But going back to the boundaries thing, I think it's if we have established, like you have an hour, we're having the call, and then sticking to it, I think it helps you to not get into to burnout and to be overburdened by
Sure.
it. And again, you'll find that actually there will be a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I'd love to talk to you about my experience, but I don't need anything. I just want to share. So being available for that can be important, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful for this call and I'm looking forward to the class.
Great. I look forward to having
Thank
you in
you.
class. Yeah. Okay. Warren, there we
Yeah,
go.
there we go.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. You were talking about the dual, non-dual threshold,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. And kind of related to that is, I was wondering how you feel about, I know this discussion has gone a lot, around a lot before, but uh, high dose, full breakthrough experience and then like low and moderate dose leading up to that and working with both of those. Do you feel that do you feel that it's useful to approach from both ends that way?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
first on the non-dual threshold. So the way that I like to describe it is that the human ego is incredibly resilient. In other words, it will keep trying to reconfigure and reestablish itself under extreme circumstances. And that's probably a good thing. But what that also means is that it takes an awful lot of input to actually bring it to the point of dissolution. Um, it's this interesting paradox that even if somebody completely dissolves into the non-dual state, when the ego comes back, that's when people are like, I didn't know it was possible to trip this hard. Even though they're actually past the peak at that point. So they're actually coming down. But that's how strong it needs to be to actually dissolve the ego. And that up until that point, the ego will still be there and trying to manage the show in some capacity. And that I always like to tell people if they're working with low and medium or moderate doses, I always tell them, I know this may be hard to hear, but please understand that you have no idea what's on the other side of that threshold. that no amount of working up to the threshold gives you any information about what's on the other side of it, because everything else is filtered through the construct of the ego and our conceptuality and our sense of self, versus this goes beyond it. So it's a great big unknown. Now, in my professional opinion, small and moderate or mid-range doses are actually a lot more effective and much easier to work with after someone has had a full release dose. Because what we see is that people who are given small doses first, with the idea of we're going to start you small and work up to the large dose, a lot of people become so uncomfortable with that they choose not to take the full dose. So these low and moderate doses, because they still present as, wow, this is really strong, but the ego is still present. And then the ego doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know what to think. And that because this energy is very expansive, it can be bringing up traumatic material, repressed energies, repressed emotions. And a lot of people get very uncomfortable and very agitated. But if you've had a full release dose and you know, like, oh, all I need to do is let go and not do anything and just let it happen, people can bring that same kind of energetic stance into the lower dose work that they do afterwards. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people who like to start people with a very low dose and then slowly work them up to a large dose. My personal approach has never been that. It's always, let's start large and then we can go with smaller doses, and they're much more effective. There are differences of opinion there, but I will say that on the integration side, I'd say it's at least 50%, if not higher, of people saying, well, the small dose didn't really do much of anything. And then the medium dose, that just made me really uncomfortable and I really didn't like it. But then I got to the large dose, I was like, yeah, this is it. Versus it's a bit rare for people to say, oh, and I really enjoyed that small dose, and or I really enjoyed that medium dose. But again, after they've had the full release, then those smaller doses, they're like, oh yeah, now I can remember what the experience was like, and I can just relax into this. But prior to that full release dose, it's just hard for people to actually relax and surrender within it, and they tend to get aggravated and uncomfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that, yeah, it seems that after a large experience, dissolution, that afterwards, when you're working with medium doses, for example, it's kind of an integration practice in a way.
Yes.
And what it does is it teaches, it's a way for you to incorporate that and actually confront not confront the ego, but embrace the ego.
Yeah.
And transcend it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, Warren, that it can be used for integration. Absolutely. And then for some people, like even just a hit of cannabis can kind of trigger reactivation, and people can use that. So I do teach a whole section on inducing reactivations through these kind of methods, or going back to the medicine to integrate the experience and even recall more. But yeah, I think it's much more effective afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Warren. All right. Oh, Sasha, are you talking? You're muted.
Oh, yes.
Oh, there
So
we go.
this was the last person who wanted to have asked a question. Is there anyone else? If there's not anyone else, Martin, I think you can close the call.
All right.
3, 2, 1. I guess you can close it, yes.
All right. Well, thank you guys for attending. Again, I hope that you feel that you've learned something. I really enjoyed speaking with you and presenting to you today. And for some of you, see you in class, either the facilitation class or the integration class. And please feel free to reach out anytime about any of these topics.
Thank you.